Բարև ձեզ բարեկամներ, այսօր Ամերիկայի Ձայնի հայկական ծառայության հյուրն է հայտնի վերլուծաբան Փոլ Գոբլը, որի հետ այսօր մենք կզրուցենք Հայաստանի եւ Ռուսաստանի միջև հարաբերությունների մասին, կզրուցենք հայ-ադրբեջանական խնդրի շուրջ, կանդրադառնանք Լեռնային Ղարաբաղի խնդրին, ինչպես նաեւ Վրաստանի եւ Ռուսաստանի միջև ու ՆԱՏՕ-ի միջև հարաբերություններին։ Thank you, Mr. Gobel, for visiting us and for your time. And
thank you for having me.
Armenia, and better to say the leadership of Armenia, decided to join customs union. Do you think it was the best solution for Armenia, or there was some pressure from Russia? Something was keeping Armenia from joining association?
Well,
what
three quick points. First, Armenia is located in a very dangerous and bad neighborhood, and therefore it's always in the process of looking for ways out. This was one way. The second point is that Armenia, unfortunately, is a country which has no good choices. That all the choices that are available to it are negative in one way or another. That almost anything Yerevan will do will have negative consequences. Americans, when they say you have a choice, imply that one of those options is good. Well, I would say that in Armenia's case, almost none of the options are good.
So whose fault is this?
But my third point is that the Russian government is desperate to push Armenia into joining the customs union and ultimately the Eurasian Union. Why is that? Because now that Ukraine is not going to even be part of the Commonwealth of Independent States and that Belarus is the, quote, last dictatorship in Europe, Russia's customs union and Russia's Eurasian Union look all too much like Russia plus Muslim countries. And that's a real problem domestically for Russia, but it's also symbolically a problem for Russia in the world. And so dragooning Yerevan into joining made good sense from Moscow's point of view, and it's entirely possible that given the bad choices Armenia had, or at least as appears to have from the outside, this was not the worst they could have done, although I believe there are other options that should have been explored, and I do not believe that Russia is on Armenia's side. I believe that, as a commentator once said, from Moscow's point of view, Georgia is the way, Armenia is the weapon, and for Moscow, in the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan is the prize. And I think that all too often Armenians, because they have no good choices, assume that Russia is on their side rather than Russia manipulating them for Russia's own purposes, something that has become much worse under the presidency of Vladimir Putin.
So some say that the pressure could be about Nagorno-Karabakh coming from Russia, the threats and pressure. If so, recently in one of the meetings of the customs union leaders, we saw that Nursultan Nazarbayev, how he approached to the Armenian issue about Nagorno-Karabakh and said that Armenia can join without separately, and that there must be border control.
Well, look.
Yeah. Also, one question: Do you think Russia can join customs union with Crimea?
Well, I think the Russian occupation of Crimea is illegal. I have urged that all countries in the world that believe in international law adopt a policy of non-recognition. And I think the Russians will probably insist on joining anything they dominate with whatever they claim. That doesn't make it legitimate, just as Russia's occupation of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania between 1944 and 1991
so there will
made
be
that
border
legitimate.
Control between Russia and Crimea?
No, there won't.
Never.
Russia will insist on its own way. On the other hand, let us be very clear. Vladimir Putin has violated one of the fundamental rules on which the post-Soviet world had operated, and that is border stability. The position of the Russian Federation, until Vladimir Putin's latest move, the position of the international community, as expressed in a variety of declarations and agreements, is that the borders that were those of the Union republics in Soviet times were to become international borders. And any suggestion that those be changed has been rejected. I think that the Russian government has played games in the two breakaway republics out of Georgia, which it its military force allowed to secede. It's been interested in maintaining the so-called frozen, although they're not very frozen for the people there, conflicts in Karabakh and in Transnistria, and in sparking conflicts elsewhere. Moscow made a very serious error in occupying Crimea from its own interests, because all the countries around it are troubled by the idea that the borders can be changed by force majeure. And so it's not surprising that Kazakhstan's Nursultan Nazarbayev wanted to make it very clear that if Armenia was going to become part of the customs union or the Eurasian Union, it would have to do so without anyone recognizing Armenian de facto control of portions of Azerbaijan. That's simply where everyone has been. Russia is standing between two stools, and it's likely to fall off at some point.
So there was kind of pressure from Nursultan Nazarbayev on Russia?
No. Russia couldn't possibly, if Russia agreed to an Armenian definition of its borders, two things would have to follow. First is the Republic of Armenia would have to formally annex portions of Azerbaijan, which would probably trigger a war. It would certainly isolate Armenia. And second, in the absence of such annexation, which the Russians would argue they have done with Crimea, the borders of the Republic of Yerevan, of Armenia, are the borders of 1991, not anything more. If you change those rules, if you open the door to border changes, then all kinds of things become possible. None of the borders, not one of the borders of the post-Soviet states were historical, had existed for hundreds of years, or had remained unchanged. They were drawn and manipulated by Stalin, almost in every case, in order to promote ethnic conflict so that it would help Moscow manage the empire. Those borders, however, it was the international community decided, and Russia and most of the post-Soviet states completely agreed, that the risks of changing those borders in 91 were far greater than the benefits of trying to rectify what were Stalinist crimes. There was no border of Armenia or Azerbaijan or Georgia in 1850. That didn't exist. Those borders were created in the early Soviet period, and Stalin manipulated them, and the borders among the Union republics of the USSR changed more than 200 times as manipulation. So what was decided was that the status quo, however incorrect it is from lots of terms, was less risky than promoting change. What Putin has done in Crimea calls all of that into question, and the country that has the most to lose from border changes is precisely the Russian Federation, large parts of which are not part of Russia in any reasonable definition.
Russia is becoming more and more aggressive. Whose fault is this? Is it Russia's fault or the fault of West? Maybe after the collapse of the Soviet
Vladimir
Union,
Putin.
there was a little pressure on Russia, or there was a little help to Russia?
Well, I think that there's lots of blame to spread around. The Western governments in general assumed that if Russia became capitalist, it would therefore become democratic, which was nonsensical, but that's what the assumption was. It's also true that there's been a double standard. If Belarus does something in violation of human rights, it gets jumped on. If Russia does the same thing and much worse, no one says anything. So on the one hand, Russia figures it can do things without penalty. The second thing is Vladimir Putin had a bargain with the Russian people between 2001 and 2008. That bargain is gone. Putin got support from the Russian people for his highly authoritarian and increasingly authoritarian regime in exchange for 7% growth rates. Beginning at the economic crisis and the fall of the price of oil, Russians have no reason to keep that bargain. So what Putin did is what Russian rulers have historically done: create international tensions. Create them. They don't even exist, but you create them in order to justify repression, to support the central government. The occupation of Crimea and the subversion of Ukraine is a Vladimir Putin self-preservation action. It's something that Putin and his regime have done to save their own skins. Putin was in terrible trouble in 2011 and 2012. Some of that trouble was put off by repressive measures. But finally, Putin decided he needed more than just repression. He needed to gin up some xenophobic patriotism, and so he's throwing his weight around. The international community, in my mind, has not responded at all adequately. That doesn't mean I'm in favor of moving military force up against, but I think Russia needs to be put on notice that it is no longer a regular member of the international community. Throwing it out of the G8 was a good idea. I personally think that no senior American official should meet with Vladimir Putin. I think we should make it very clear that this is a criminal act by a criminal regime, and that until it changes its spots, until it changes direction, and that probably means until it changes its leader, the United States and the European countries will operate at normal, that is to say ambassadorial or lower levels of relations, but we will not have any kind of meeting. Mr. Putin has put himself beyond the pale, and Crimea is bad not only in terms of violating international borders. It's bad because Vladimir Putin has articulated a position which we fought a war in Europe in the early 40s to overthrow. Putin says, if you're a member of my ethnic group, it's more important than being a citizen of a foreign country. And his third crime, if you will, with Crimea and with eastern Ukraine, is that he is asserting that the proper form of political organization in the world should be empires rather than nation states. Since 1919 and the Versailles Treaty, we have had a position internationally that nation states are a desirable feature. That's why there was support for national self-determination in Armenia and the other former Soviet republics. If Putin gets his way of saying, these borders are irrelevant, being an ethnic Russian is more important than being a citizen of a foreign country, and empires are the way to run the world, the risks are enormous. First, around Russia, but second, elsewhere. What country has the largest number of co-ethnics abroad? It isn't Russia, it's China. And do you really want the government in Beijing to learn the lessons that what Vladimir Putin is doing is acceptable? If you want to really destabilize the world, allow that to happen. I unfortunately do not believe that the Western leadership understands just how dangerous what Vladimir Putin has done, what a threat it poses to the international order, and that it poses a threat to even the small number of countries that still line themselves up with Russia, which isn't very many, and they aren't mostly very nice. North Korea, Bolivia, and some other places, Cuba, places like that, because what Putin's agenda is a threat to all of them at one level or another.
So what is the solution for Russia? Will it be some change? What kind of change?
Of course there will be a change. No one lives forever. Of course there will be a change. The question is how much damage will be done before that happens. My own view is that if Vladimir Putin is in the Kremlin 5 years from now, the odds are very, very good that the Russian Federation will be a third or less the size it is today. That he is destroying his own country, and I believe that the wisest and most thoughtful Russians understand that.
How much smaller countries can suffer before that?
Unfortunately, almost all of them can. And unfortunately, like most leaders who are in decline, he won't go in a good way. It will be in rather ugly way because he will do what he can to survive. And the kind of support he got by aggression in Ukraine will only encourage him to engage in more aggression. The only way to make it very clear that such aggression isn't in the interests of the Russian people is to punish the leadership as much as possible. And that means to deprive it of a lot of the contacts it has. People say, well, there's not much the West can do. No, To force Moscow right now to pull back, to withdraw from Crimea, I don't think there's very much we can do that would achieve that in the next 6 weeks. I do believe that a non-recognition policy sets in turn something that can happen in the long term. But on the other hand, the Russian people say in polls that the most important thing they have gotten out of the end of the Soviet Union is the right to travel abroad. Well, that can be eliminated. You simply close the visa windows. You make it very clear that the United States has, and the West, the Europeans, the British, have an interest in supporting any country that feels itself threatened by Russia, be it Armenia, be it Ukraine, be it Azerbaijan, be it Kazakhstan. We should not decide what we do or don't do in this part of the world because of how Russia supposedly will feel. That is an argument that is wrong. I believe that that Vladimir Putin not only has done more to build the Ukrainian nation than any leader in history, but he has revived NATO. And he's doing things that are not in the interest of the Russian people, let alone anyone else. And I believe that more and more people in Russia understand that. That doesn't mean that anything's going to happen soon, but at some point, the world's richest and most corrupt president will not be in the Kremlin anymore.
Particularly for Armenia, what is the way out for Armenia? What can it do? Is there a way for finding other allies, neighbors, for example, to be friendly with Turkey? Or?
Well, I personally think that one of Armenia's problems is that Armenia has frequently, or Armenians, let's not call the country, but Armenians have frequently not thought big enough. That things that seem absolutely impossible may not be if you think large enough, if you go beyond. I've always believed that the solutions to the regional problems have to be sought primarily in the region itself. Armenia lives in a dangerous neighborhood. No one's going to deny that. But it has to figure out a way out of that. And my own view is that few nations would benefit more from a settlement of Karabakh, even under the Madrid principles, which I know Armenia is not entirely comfortable with, but having a solution, and especially linking in that solution to transit rights across Azerbaijani territory, rail and pipeline and highway lines. I mean, given that Armenia has now been blocked to cross Georgia, given that going to Turkey is going to take a longer time to overcome historical experiences, and given the nature of Iran, I think Armenians need to think that way, think big, think about a much grander solution. Obviously.
So forgetting about Nagorno-Karabakh?
Well, I think that what I believe, I mean, I had my own views right after the Soviet Union came apart. But given how long it's been, and given the international community's commitment to border stability, I think what one has to go for is some kind of radical form of autonomy within Azerbaijan, because otherwise the international community is not going to be on your side. Russia's side is taking that position. What amazes me is Armenian officials who see Moscow as being on Armenia's side when the Russian side has signed on to exactly the same principles that have now been agreed to by the other participants in the process. I don't think Russia's on your side. I think Russia wants the conflict to continue, because as long as the conflict continues, Armenia is isolated. And solving Azerbaijan could continue. You know, it's not isolated because it has other options. Iran is not isolated because of this. It's isolated for other reasons. And Turkey is not isolated. Georgia is not isolated. It has the Black Sea coast. So you have to ask yourself, of the many bad things that Armenians have to do or have to choose among, what is the least bad? There's no option. There's no option that's an unqualified good. It doesn't exist.
So the main problem for Armenians is Nagorno-Karabakh. If this problem has been solved, all the questions will be
Well,
solved
I think
for
if it's solved,
Russia will forget about threatening Armenia.
well, I think that, no. I think what will happen is that it depends how it's solved. If it's solved on the basis of bilateral accords with Azerbaijan, so that Armenia gets more than just a recognition of a special autonomy, be it Åland Islands or whatever or formula you want to use, but it gets transit rights, and not just to Stepanakert, but rather across Azerbaijan. I think if that happens, it will be harder for Russia to put pressure on Armenia. It will not be impossible. Tragically, millions of Armenians have left Armenia because of the economic situation. The government is unfortunately corrupt. Is lacking in legitimacy in the eyes of many people. There are still many people suffering from the earthquake of a quarter century ago. There are lots of things that need to be done. I think as long as Armenians buy into the idea that the only thing that matters is Karabakh and Russia is their only ally, they're going to find themselves in an increasingly dependent and less flexible way. I would like to see a flourishing Armenia, well connected to the world, living in peace with its neighbors. I think such an Armenia is better for Armenians than anything short of that. Is it going to be easy to do that? No, because it's going to require changing some of the things people think.
Yeah.
But what I would encourage any Armenian that I speak with is think big. Think about where you want to be in 25 years, and then line up the options and ask yourself, how do we get there? It's not going to be easy to achieve even the less good options. Doing nothing, however, will guarantee the worse that you will get, the more worse options, if I can use that expression.
Mr. Gobel, one or two questions about Georgian service.
Sure.
Yeah, about Georgia request from Georgian service. Georgia wants to sign the EU agreement coming
Right.
Friday.
Right.
Can somebody expect, or Georgia expect, threats from Russia? Or
Georgia's already got threats from Russia.
What
Russian
kind of
forces are on. Russia controls totally the South Ossetia.
So
It has
will
leverage in
happen after
Abkhazia.
that?
I'm sorry?
What will happen after that when Georgia signs? Or
Well, I think the Russian government will continue to engage in bombastic actions. I think that to the extent that the European Union and ultimately the Western Alliance indicates that messing with Georgia will have consequences, to the extent we have any credibility at all, that Russia will not reinvade Georgia as it did in August 2008, but pressure, economic, political, of course. And this is nothing new. It's not as if everything's been wonderful and things suddenly got bad in the last 5 minutes. This has been a dangerous world in which Russia has been engaged in, or Moscow better, has been engaged in subversive actions around its neighbors. And we are going to have to find ways to counter that. The best way is economic and political reform. Economies developing, interconnected with the world, so that people will want to live in the countries and will have a better future. Democracy, so that you'll have human rights, and also so that you'll have a orderly succession and governments that are viewed as legitimate. Those are things to go for. Unfortunately, at the present time, we have a situation where an awful lot of people are in countries where the governments are corrupt, the economies are decaying, they're not well connected to the international economic system. What Georgia is trying to do is escape from that. I hope it can. I hope Armenia can. I hope Azerbaijan can. I hope that all of these countries can move in the direction of being legitimate, liberal democracies with lots of freedom, lots of economic growth, and be integrated in the international community, which means integrated with Europe, not with Moscow.
No, but NATO, Western countries, Georgia wants to be accepted in NATO, but some NATO countries are on that.
Well, I don't expect it to happen in the next 5 minutes. I personally think that NATO needs to rethink a lot of things. NATO won the purpose for which it was created, which was to get the Soviets out of Europe. what it has done since has been a halfway house between disappearing and a much grander strategy. My own view is that Russian aggressiveness in Ukraine and elsewhere probably means that the defense alliance will grow. Will it include Georgia as soon as the Georgians would like? Absolutely not. Might it include Georgia and even Armenia down the pike? Yes, I think that's possible if the Russian government continues to behave badly. The Russian government is building its own nemesis. It is at present time, for the first time since the Crimean War, Russia does not share a border with a single country that's its friend. Not one. That's an amazing record. It hasn't been like that since 1856. And the Russian government is driving these people. Now, that there are people in NATO who are not encouraged to go further is absolutely true. But I certainly do not think we should rule anything out. I think one of the things that we in the West have to stop doing is announcing what we are not going to do. We don't have to say what we are going to do, but let's not say what we won't do. Okay?
Yeah, Mr. Goble, thank you very much
for
this very interesting interview.
Thank you. My pleasure.